Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's Roshan Muhammed, Salih here, editor of Five Pillars, and this is a special show just to do a bit of post-election analysis on the Batley and Spen by-election, which took place last night. And as we know now, Labour held the seat. Kim Leadbeater, their candidate, won with around 13,200 votes. Second place was the Conservatives with 12,900 or so votes, and in third place was George Galloway with 8,200 or so votes. My initial reaction is that it's disappointing results. Obviously, I think most Muslims wanted Labour to lose, to send a clear message out to them that you can't take Muslim votes for granted. That didn't happen. However, Muslims did desert Labour. They did abandon Labour, and they either voted for George Galloway or didn't vote at all. And Galloway did get quite a significant vote. And I'm sure that Labour will, after this initial euphoria of them winning, they will do post-election analysis and will understand that Muslims were very angry with them. Now, I spoke a little bit earlier on with Robert Carter, a fellow journalist who I went up to Batley last Friday to film events there. We got into a bit of a controversy with Shakil Afsar and the Labour candidate Kim Leadbeater. And I asked Robert basically what his take was on last night's result. Assalamu alaikum, Robert. Good morning. Your reaction to last night's result?
Well, I think it's the case of the liar Leadbeater coming out with a very tiny and insignificant win for herself. Obviously, it's a bit of a shock. I won't deny that. Obviously the pundits were all saying that it was going to be a Labour defeat, and a lot of people were arguing that it was going to be a crushing Labour defeat. So I, of course, got naturally very, very excited about that. But now, obviously, they pulled out a win. One thing I will mention straight away, because obviously all the mainstream are going with how this is a legendary victory for Labour and all that type of stuff. It's not. Labour have performed a lot worse than they have in previous elections. In fact, in the last election alone, they got something like 22k, 22.5k votes. This time it's only about 13k. And the Tories were very, very close behind. Even Galloway did fairly well, I think, for him, given the fact that how abysmally he's performed in other attempts to get elected into different positions in the past couple of years. So ultimately, Batley and Spen are not overwhelmingly supportive of Labour. In fact, their support has diminished quite a lot, and more people voted against Labour than they did for Labour, quite significantly so. So Labour is definitely not winning on a popular mandate. But my message is that Kim Leadbeater is basically lying her way to power, and the mainstream media have adopted many of the nonsense information that she picked up on, including when we were up there and we witnessed a so-called harassment incident, when actually it wasn't. It was more of a disgruntled former member who happened to be Muslim, actually confronted Kim after she spent weeks basically ignoring the press, including Muslim media like you and myself.
Yeah, we'll pick that apart a little bit later, but let's talk about the Muslim vote. I mean, I said to you a few days ago, if Labour wins, then it will be an indictment of the Muslims in Batley and Spen. However, I've kind of changed my mind on that one, because ultimately Galloway did get 8,300 votes, something like that. And considering that he started from a position of 0 only a few weeks ago, that is quite impressive. And I bet you at least 80% of those votes were from Muslims. So I think it is pretty obvious that Muslims did desert Labour. They did abandon Labour. They did vote for Galloway. However, the fact is, and the disappointing fact is, it wasn't enough to get it completely over the line. What do you reckon about the Muslim vote? What this says about the Muslims of Batley?
Well, obviously, congratulations to all the Muslims that did make the effort. I think you're right that there was a significant number of them that did attempt to punish Labour, and they did punish Labour, given the fact that Kim won on a very poor number of votes. But ultimately, I think I would have liked to have seen much more of an effort made, perhaps even from Muslims outside of Batley and Spen, because, you know, there was obviously a lot of complaints about outsiders coming in, but it's not illegal for that to happen. And I think that ultimately Muslims inside Batley and Spen did a good job and they tried their utmost, but perhaps it was Muslims and activists outside of Batley and Spen that just didn't bother making the effort.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, because I'm on a few kind of WhatsApp groups of Muslim activists, very prominent ones, and I was trying to get them energized over this, and they just weren't energized. I mean, they were interested in it, and now they're all talking about it, but in the crucial period leading up to the election, they hardly touched it, to be honest. Some of them might have a principled objection to voting and participation in politics, but most of them don't, to be honest. Most of them are, they were very pro Jeremy Corbyn, for example. So, yeah, I think you're right there. There was this kind of negation of duty. I also think some older Muslims in the constituency probably stuck with Labour, but I think that was the minority. And ultimately, if you're going to run a campaign and try and get Muslims to vote a certain way, you're not going to get 100% of Muslims to agree with you. There's always going to be, if you get 80%, that's a massive achievement. And I think that's what local Muslims in Batley did. What about the Tories? I mean, I don't blame the Muslims. I blame the Tories and the mainstream media and Labour for this victory. We'll pick that all apart. Let's get to the Tories. They literally did not campaign. They had this kind of, strategy of not campaigning, letting everyone else destroy each other. But I'm sure if Ryan Stevenson had, thrown the kitchen sink at it, he would have got at least 1,000 more votes, and that would have been enough to get him over the line.
Yes, it's a very valid point. I mean, I think what the Tories wanted to do was basically, was it like an over-the-phone campaign, lie low. I think they were just expecting that they would pull a win without actually having to do very much. And I think what they tried to do is ultimately protect their candidate by making him not go into the streets at all to face any legitimate face-to-face criticism. And obviously it means that it could have avoided any embarrassments that could pop up along the way. But obviously now with hindsight, we know that hasn't worked and it's been a failed tactic. Even though they did manage to get a quite considerable number of votes simply from doing absolutely nothing. Again, very damning of Labour. But one thing I want to make very, very clear to all of the Muslims who perhaps didn't make the effort, I think that Kim and the Labour Party are not going to forget this. I think that they've seen how the Muslims have reacted. They've seen how, people like George Galloway, for example, have utilised the fact that there are so many unhappy minorities that used to vote Labour and now they don't. And I suspect that they will seek vengeance for this. I do not believe that the Labour Party is going to take this lying down. And I think that one area where this could play out is over the Batley Grammar School issue, for example, the blasphemy scandal, this type of thing. Labour could now swing very much to the right and turn on Muslims quite badly. So I would issue a word of warning to Muslims here.
It's interesting you should say that, because my initial reaction was perhaps the opposite, that they would obviously do post-election analysis. And obviously they're all happy now and they're having a pop at the Labour left and indirectly Muslims as well, I guess. But when, all that euphoria passes, they'll do proper post-election analysis and they will see that they lost the Muslim vote. And that could, kind of transfer nationwide at some point as well. And we're 4 million people in this country, we're not an insignificant lobby at all. And traditionally, we've been a vote bank for the Labour Party. So I think personally, they're more likely to listen to Muslims because of this vote. Don't you go along with that?
No, I don't. I'm actually quite concerned because ultimately Labour has credited the fact that they didn't do as well because extremists came in from outside and upset locals. Paul Mason, a Labour activist and journalist, so-called journalist, he came out with a tweet just today after the result and basically smeared all Muslims, saying that the only reason some Muslims went against Labour was because they had homophobic views and ultimately they've basically been riled up by extremists and so on. So this is what's going to happen going forward, I fear, is that Labour will basically say that Muslims are extremists that don't vote for them. And this narrative will be peddled, and it will be, again, to try and create fitna amongst the Muslims. It will be to try and intimidate Muslims to say, you better vote for us or you're going to be branded an extremist, for example. So I do fear that there will be a very negative campaign conducted, blowback Muslims. They don't want to see Muslims actually gaining a strong foothold on a Muslim manifesto or a Muslim position in itself. They want to break the Muslims and then obviously try and convince some of the more moderate Muslims to vote for them.
Let's see how that plays out. So we disagree on that one. And I actually find your comments very interesting. And I wouldn't be surprised if you turn out to be right and me wrong. But let's see how that one plays out. But let's talk about the media and specifically the Shakil Afsar incident. And let's have a little bit of introspection here, Robert. Because I'm gonna ask you the question, basically. Are we to blame? Are you and me to blame for Labour winning? Because that's what a few people have already tweeted me and basically saying, oh, you guys, you filmed the Shakil Afsar incident, you made that go viral. And that's what turned the campaign for Kim Leadbeater and led to a late sympathy vote surge for her.
Well, no, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't blame someone for taking their democratic right to speak out and to confront a politician. I mean, that happens all the time, right? But what happened was the incidents that took place after that. So, for example, you had the mainstream media whipping up a storm which was based on misinformation and lies. You had the candidate for Labour giving an interview where she basically said things that weren't factually true, and that was again adopted and shared around on social media and things like that. They've made up lies about Galloway's campaign, which obviously hasn't helped, and that's been again adopted by mainstream media. So my real blame is what you said earlier on, that the mainstream media has adopted liar Leadbeater, as I like to call her now, and they essentially platformed her so much and created this narrative of, oh, this poor woman needs to be elected or else, extremists win the day, which is just completely void of facts and reality on the ground. And it's an unfair narrative which basically meant that the establishment wanted Kim to win. The establishment media wanted her to win. She got all the positive coverage, all the sympathy vote went her way, potentially, and she basically was treated differently to how the other candidates, including, to be fair to him, George Galloway, was treated. And I do think that Galloway, whether you like him or not, does have some legitimate grounds to be upset with how things have turned out. Yeah. I would be very interested to see how, I think he's taking them to court, right? He's going to challenge the election result.
Well, I mean, I think there are grounds for him to challenge the election result. I mean, obviously you and me don't have any faith in the mainstream media anyway, because we, through our experience on the ground, we've seen how they've lied again and again and again. And we know this in our hearts. But this was just yet another blatant example. We saw with our own eyes what happened that day. And it was spun in such a way that suddenly George Galloway's on the other side of the street, laughing and pointing at and smirking. And stuff. It never happened, just literally never happened. He was on the same side of the street, right in front of the mosque entrance. And he was probably a little bit embarrassed about what was going on, to be honest, because he's a wily kind of political campaigner. And then you have these...
They said Shakil Afsar was a George Galloway supporter. Yeah. He never, ever said that he was at all. And it was never corrected afterwards. There were statements made that went viral and then no one printed any corrections or updated the story. They just let it sit. Plus you have all the accusations that Galloway said of dirty tricks from the Labour campaign,
making election posters and
all that type of stuff. I mean, the Labour Party has behaved disgracefully. That's not been talked about. They've used dirty tricks, allegedly. That's not really being talked about. Leadbeater is a liar. I'm sorry to say, she seems like a nice lady otherwise, but she is a liar. She said lies, and the mainstream media printed it, and then she didn't update her story. Keir Starmer also retweeted those lies and again hasn't apologized or deleted the tweet as far as I know. Labour are a party of liars, and we know that because they obviously lied about the Iraq war as well, just to throw that in as well. But Labour are a bunch of liars.
I think they've got, obviously Labour have probably got loads of money through their membership subscriptions, so they've probably concluded that any court case will just fight it with the membership donations. I hope George Galloway does win, that he sues the media for lying, that he sues Kim Leadbeater for lying, and that he goes after the Electoral Commission, whatever. I really hope he does do that. What about lessons? Concluding this talk now, what about lessons for the future, Robert? I mean, what are your main takeaways from this in terms of Muslims and how we should approach the political process? Some people this morning have tweeted me and left comments on my Facebook page, some Muslims saying, oh, this is proof again that the Muslim vote doesn't work and that we should have nothing to do with the party political process. I mean, I'm half sympathetic with that because as you know, I feel that our focus should be on organizing our own community. That should be our overall strategy. But I'm also a pragmatist, and in certain circumstances, I also believe that we should use any halal means at our disposal to influence the society in which we live. And we all know that voting is not haram. The majority of scholars say it is haram. So I don't think anyone can have a go at us Islamically for encouraging it in certain circumstances.
I think that there are some positives that we can take from this. Obviously, I think most people are going to walk away and just take it as it is, which is a defeat. But at the same time, as you rightly said earlier on, clearly many Muslims went out, and Galloway actually performed fairly well for him. Obviously, he came third, but he still racked up thousands of votes. And throughout the entire campaign, Labour were absolutely bricking themselves. There's no doubt about that. They were really
kitchen sink.
Exactly. They were really terrified. And in the end, they did actually perform badly, although it's not being discussed right now by the mainstream. Labour only narrowly held on to this. It's an absolutely disgraceful performance from their side, and they had to use dirty tricks and lies.
They're down something like 9,000 votes on the last election. And when I heard the result, because I was listening to the result live, when I heard 13,000 something, I thought, right, Tories are going to romp this. And then Tories were 12,900. The fact is, not enough people voted Tory because these guys just didn't bother campaigning. Literally, they didn't campaign. Should we have? I'm just thinking to myself, maybe I shouldn't say it out loud because it is kind of a dodgy thing to say. But instead of telling Muslims to vote Galloway or not vote at all, should we have actually told Muslims to vote Tory? I know that voting Tory is like practically haram. But there would have been a strategic reason for voting Tory, and it would have ensured a Labour defeat.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because I was brought up that you'd rather be dead than vote Tory. So yeah, I literally wouldn't for that reason. I don't know about other British Muslims though, because obviously there may be some issues which
secretly voted Tory.
It's a difficult one to answer. I mean, I think I would advocate more for withdrawing your vote and not even participating rather than voting for Tory, because they're both, the Tories and Labour Party are both Islamophobic. They're both anti-Palestine. They're both anti-Kashmir. We hate Labour because they've lied to us. They say that they're pro-Muslim, pro-Palestine, all that. The Tories are just honest. They're like, no, we just don't like.
Yeah, they're blaming Islam.
They're just like, we just don't like.
And also we have no influence over the Tories, whereas we do have some influence over Labour, because obviously there's a battle going on for the soul of Labour between the right and the left, and we can influence that in a little way, I think, in certain circumstances. I mean, my final word on this, Robert, is that life is full of successes and failures, ups and downs, and as Muslims, we don't get too low when we fail, and we don't get too high when we succeed. And when we fail, we say Alhamdulillah. When we succeed, we say Alhamdulillah. So yeah, we just take this on the chin. It's not a total defeat. It's disappointing. In many ways, I would say it's a partial victory in some ways. So I think we can spin this positively. And we move on. We move on to the next battle.
Absolutely. And I think that, one of the things I was going to mention is that, although we haven't secured a victory now, it's shown that there is potential for the Muslim vote to become a thing in the future. As our community continues to grow, there are certain areas, battlegrounds, constituencies where the Muslim vote is very, very key. And although it may not have been the winning factor in this particular by-election, it obviously showed that in the future it could be. And there are other constituencies throughout the country where, again, the Muslim vote could be very, very key. So even during the election campaign, Muslims had a lot of power in their hands. It's only now that obviously we've lost the momentum because of the way the vote went. But there is a lot of potential. So I think with time, inshallah, we will continue to gain more political power. We just need the representation. All these so-called Muslim MPs so far don't actually really represent Muslims or Muslim viewpoints, and that is a real shame, and that needs to be changed.
All right. Okay, Jazakallah khair, Robert. Thanks for coming on this morning. All right. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thanks.